Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Steve Renshaw. I'm co-founder of Ratio FS, and I'm joined today by Doug Morris, who is the strategy director at Ratio FS. And today we're going to be talking about microtransformation in financial services. And by microtransformation, I mean moving away from the bigger picture multi-year transformation projects and focusing more on how marketing teams right now can start to make changes by looking at organization, KPIs, team structure, capabilities, and so on. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Doug to kick off.
Thank you, Steve. So our fundamental thesis is basically this. A new normal for financial services has arrived, and it's the age of the customer. As marketers, we now need to respond. Our technology, ways of working, culture, and even campaigns need to be aligned around customer needs. This means no more campaigns trying to exclusively to sell to the customer. Instead, we need campaigns trying to solve for the customer. FS really is not immune from what we're seeing in every other sector in this regard. Technological and economic forces like the rise of mobile devices and the internet put customers in control. They want a consistent experience no matter the time, device, or channel with which they're interacting with you on. They expect their FS provider to meet their individual needs and preferences in the same way that their media streaming service does or their favorite big tech company does. Expectations as to what the art of the possible looks like are therefore being shaped both by digital-first disruptors in FS, as well as the experiences these consumers are having in other sectors. Perceptions of the service you are delivering are being framed against those expectations. As consumers interact with your brand, they are making an evaluative judgment about the experience gap between yourself and other providers, which is often quite large. And this judgment is followed by subsequent effects like churn, giving you greater or lesser wallet share, etc. So the question is, how do we meet these customer expectations? Obviously, we need to use technology to deliver this 2021 brand experience. Brand building in the era of the customer now means more than executing above the line campaigns. We need to adopt brand experience marketing and leverage data, technology, and storytelling to create new types of customer experiences. We need to shift our marketing efforts from us out to a two-way conversation where what we communicate to a customer is dependent on what they actually need and what they say back. Only fully leveraging marketing technology can allow us to do this. Without executing this story in a connected way across channels, as this technology allows us to, we end up with gaps and disjointed experiences, or in other words, more of the status quo. The reality is that while we need MarTech to deliver the experience consumers are expecting, efforts by FSI to digitally transform their business and adopt that technology are almost always slower than expected and frequently fail. The statistics are pretty dire here. According to Deloitte, 70% of bank transformation spending in 2018 was wasted. That amounted to $900 billion. In our view, at least when it comes to marketing share of this failed spending, it's largely due to an excessive focus on getting the technology into place and insufficient focus on all of the other supporting changes to working practices, organizational structure, KPIs, objectives, and ultimately the belief systems we hold individually about what it means to be a marketer in this place, or in other words, what we believe about the culture of the company. The bottom line is that technology enables solutions to be delivered, but it's not by itself a solution. Connecting a CDP to the front end of your website will not immediately improve the experience you're delivering. Fully leveraging this technology will not happen until, as an organization, we adopt a customer-first ethos that gives us the empathy and toolkit to understand where and how the technology should actually be applied, the greatest effect for the consumer and the business, or in other words, until we undergo a cultural transformation. It's our view that agile marketing gives us the transformational pillars or the foundational pillars to actually go about building that culture. Customer-first technology adoption, which is what we're talking about, means testing ideas in the marketplace frequently, seeing whether customers actually do like those ideas and iterating accordingly. And agile marketing is a way of working that encompasses that and other attributes we need to do this. And that's why we are massive advocates of it at Ratio FS. It means small experiments focused on delivering a bit of incremental value at a time. It means responding to or adjusting our strategy based on customer feedback. And it means beginning to believe that intelligent risk, when we can learn from failure, can actually be acceptable and even beneficial. Happily, FSI is leading many industries in the adoption of these agile marketing practices. Almost 40% of FS firms are adopting agile extensively, compared to, say, 12% of travel, media, entertainment. But what we do see sometimes is that these working practices are combined to innovation teams or pods working separately to the rest of the organization, who have different or bigger budgets, are given more leeway when it comes to risk tolerance, etc. While these innovation pods can be valuable tools to explore the art of the possible, we need to embed these working practices in the mothership, so to speak, if we expect them to actually become a foundation for wider organizational change. Obviously, as marketers, we're not fully in control of the CX we deliver as an organization as a whole. If we are an individual contributor running thought leadership campaigns in a commercial bank, we don't have control over what happens when a lead gets passed to BD, to business development, or to an RM. We don't have control over timeframes for our new marketing automation system to be rolled out. So what we do need to do is be pragmatic about what we can actually do in our own area of the world to become more customer focused. Firstly, our view would be that if we want to innovate for the customer, we need to understand the customer. It's not easy when, as marketers, we don't interface with customers directly. What tends to happen is that we build up a set of assumptions and belief systems that have lots of inaccuracies about who those customers are and what they need. So we need to adopt the toolkit of customer experience professionals in order to make sure that those foundational assumptions we have are actually correct. That means using personas and journey maps, which document who customers are and what their experience is actually like. And I say using those tools, not creating them, because what we normally see is that those tools have actually been created, but sit on a shared drive somewhere and collect dust until the next website refresh sees another set constructed. So what we actually need to do is actively work to make these tools part of our workflow. So when we're next looking at executing a campaign and it's to drive awareness, look at the journey map you have for that persona and frame your communication around a real pain point they experience at that journey stage, rather than just one you assume that they have. And when you, I am sure, are kicking off your first Agile marketing POC after this webinar and you're writing user stories, try framing them around your specific customer personas rather than just a generic one, as sometimes happens, like I as a customer. So obviously we have like a lot of barriers that are holding FS back from successfully adopting this technology, from undergoing this transformation. And I'll talk at a high level about what some of those are. The first is that tech integration is a mandatory part of this picture, but it's very difficult to achieve in FSI. Most transformation programs we see have been underway for years, but still many gaps exist from an integration point of view. Consumers are expecting all of this omni-channel love to already have been delivered on the front end, but this requires joining together middle and back-end systems, which were self-evidently not built with an Agile 2021 CX in mind. Even when we talk integration, we need to recognize that not all integration is created equal. Is it one-way, two-way? How much alignment of standards exists between the systems? Does data simply get pushed from one place to another? Or are there intelligent flows with conditional logic? Even more fundamentally, how often do these systems talk to each other? Real-time data flows are one of the major challenges we are seeing preventing real-time personalization in FS. For example, with one of our clients, it takes 3 weeks to build a safe email list for one email blast. If it takes 3 weeks to build an approval list, it's obviously going to be fruitless to try and build marketing automation flows around an application journey completed in just a few days. Another major challenge with integration is that not everyone with data you need wants to give it to you. Social platforms are a major gap in most FSI company efforts to build the vaunted single customer view. Kind of stands to reason. The business model of these social media companies relies upon the data only they hold, so it's almost understandable that they aren't inclined to give up the keys to their kingdom so lightly. Even in the best case, the product from one vendor executing on one channel, integration can be a bit smoke and mirrors. For example, let's consider the Adobe Experience Cloud. Until very recently, there was a 24 to 48-hour delay before an audience segment identified in Adobe Analytics could be used to deliver a personalized experience in Adobe Target. Even Adobe's own products did not have a full server-side integration, just some CSVs or Excel files moving back and forth every day or so. These challenges with system integration are one of the major reasons that we advocate for micro, not macro transformation as the appropriate way of working. We need to be pragmatic and work with the building blocks we do have right now, not wait until we reach that tech nirvana. Another challenge is that the right people don't have access to the right data to get the job done. We know that data is the lifeblood of good customer experience. It helps us evaluate how successful our work is. It helps us to determine what the right segmentation is for personalization. But the reality is in FS that data is often in silos, that the people who could or should be leveraging that data can't get access to it. For example, let's say we want to develop a personalization pilot to grow share of wallet. We intend to execute a campaign across website and email, trying to cross-sell products. One challenge we already touched on here is whether sufficient system integration actually is in place for that to be a possibility. Does web even connect to CRM? But even having solved that problem, there are more fundamental ones at hand. What incremental product should we try and sell, and to what customer profile? How do we know what new product they will be willing or likely to take? Most FSI marketers don't have access to the data to answer this question by themselves. It sits in some other silo. We need to focus on breaking down these silos and productionizing our huge stores of data to continuously shrink the time between data discovery or finding an insight, and value creation either for the business or the customer. This is one of the main reasons that there's a trend towards adoption of data lakes and CDPs that kind of act as a middleware layer, so to speak, between these back-end or core systems and the front-end systems that are delivering the experience. But we still need to exercise pragmatism here. Not having access to all the right data doesn't mean we should do nothing. Perhaps the CRM won't be connected to web for another 2 years, so you can't profile users on their actual product holding and deliver an experience based on that. But we can still respond at a minimum to the intent they're showing right now across digital channels. If we know someone's looked at a particular product on our website, we can use that to shape the experience we deliver. So again, we need to be pragmatic, start small, and look at what is achievable to start building right now. We need to acknowledge that these customer expectations about the experience we're delivering are really indifferent to your organizational structure, which is probably a big challenge in actually delivering what they expect. So we want to deliver a consistent and unified brand experience, but the reality is that that probably relies upon many different teams, sitting in different silos who have different incentives. So we need to look at the ways in which we can work around this. So one is when we're looking at the operating model that we put into place, make sure we're involving the right people at the right times, efficiently gathering and acting on their feedback, making them feel bought into and a part of what is happening. We need to look at how we can sidestep hierarchy altogether and create direct connections among people across the organization, reducing the sense of otherness between those silos, making people understand their partners in the same mission. And we need to look at how we can build empathy, community, and shared purpose. Things like gamification initiatives, new communication platforms so people can easily reach out to each other, etc. Another challenge is that marketers and FS need to better leverage artificial intelligence or machine learning. So it's kind of self-evident that macro level journey personalization or management can be driven by humans. So we want to develop an email automation plan for the first 12 months of a small business taking a startup account if we're a commercial bank. That's something that humans can measure, conceptualize, put into place. But what do we do when we have a touch point like the website homepage visited by customers with hundreds or possibly thousands of different needs? How do we even begin to ideate what are the possible content that we can serve those people, et cetera? Simply put, it's beyond the capacity of humans to effectively manage and govern personalization when we're talking about tens or hundreds of possible different experiences. And that's why we need to look at adopting AI in order to drive that kind of micro level segmentation or personalization. What we are seeing is that AI is actually already being baked into tools many of us are using. All of the major website testing and personalization platforms now have some level of predictive personalization. And that's another thing we can leverage right now to start building this experience even before we have this tech nirvana, so to speak, in place. We know that KPIs and incentive structures are often misaligned. So we might see, for example, that performance scorecards are based on short-term deliverables, despite what we know to be the long-term objectives of digital transformation. KPIs are often also focused on internal objectives like cost of service reductions, rather than objectives which actually measure how effectively we're using tech for the customer. And even when we do have customer-focused metrics like NPS, it's kind of at the top line and it's insufficiently granular for us to get a view of how what we're doing as individuals really helping us to achieve that CX objectives. The other problem, which we'll touch on later, is that KPIs aren't necessarily aligned between teams who need to work together effectively to deliver for the customer. So we might have, for example, a dev team who are measured on how consistently they're meeting deadlines. And their incentive, therefore, is to start cutting features that are more time incentive, whereas marketers would be prioritizing features that help provide a unique selling point. And so we need to properly consider how we balance collective goals versus individual goals. Assuming that most people on the webinar aren't C-suite, you might not necessarily be influencing your partners in IT to change their KPIs, but we can still be pragmatic again, focus on micro-transformation and look at how we can improve the KPI structure in our own team or our own area in order to start achieving some of this stuff. And finally, we need to recognize something that is a bit self-evident around the risk-averse culture in financial services. We have a culture of fear of losing what we could have, what we have, rather than imagining what we could get. It's for a very good reason. Significant resources have been invested in processes and operating models, engineered and designed in the wake of the financial crisis. The focus is on things like discipline, consistency, governance, and regulations. But we need to recognize that digital transformation means uncertainty. It means experimentation. It means a fail-fast mindset, kind of the opposite of the way that we've been conditioned to think. So plainly, we need to make some changes to this risk culture, and that effort to do that needs to come from the top down and the bottom up. We need to look at how we can start to provide more of a permission structure within our teams where intelligent risk can be taken, because without risk, you can't innovate. Every experiment, after all, is an acknowledgement that we might be wrong. And there's no value to be gained in experimenting on things we already know work. So we need to accept that sometimes we will fail. But at the same time as we're driving that from the top down, we also need to be more daring as individual contributors, and start to adopt some of these experimentation practices or ethoses into our own work as individuals. We are seeing that some banks are building innovation partnerships with fintech to help accelerate this transformation, but in our view, that's not going to be a silver bullet. Onboarding alone for some of those pilots is a major challenge with a very long lead time. From what we've seen, sometimes it takes up to 6 to 8 months to get a simple prototype of a new journey into place with a fintech partnering with a major FS company. And that, after all, is a prototype that still probably only touches one customer type at one stage of their journey. So we can't rely upon those partnerships being a silver bullet to these major changes we need to make.
Great, thank you very much, Doug. So I think that's set the scene for the way that FS brands need to be looking at this challenge of microtransformation, how to get moving, how to start pulling on the levers that they have right now. And I just want to spend the second half of this session looking at examples or ways of working we have with our own clients to get them moving along this journey a bit quicker. Also looking at maybe a couple of examples outside of FS as well, and some top performers. So I just want to start by looking at what we've seen over the last 10 years. I mean, I've been working in digital for 20 and in financial services probably for the last 10. And it's interesting the change that the industry's going through. And what I've sort of tried to put together here is, I guess, the before and after picture of how marketing teams are changing, but also the organization around them are changing as well. So in a world where we had business leads briefing in requirements for campaigns to the marketing team, we had marketing IT who were essentially supporting the technology stack that the marketing team were using. But in the middle of that, you have a CMO who suddenly has not just traditional advertising and a website to manage and potentially email, but potentially loads of other platforms as well. Much more competitive campaign landscape, a lot more available to them in terms of social, ad tech, and so on. A lot more data as well available. And there was a Salesforce report, I think it was last year or the year before, that said that I think almost 60% of CMOs were struggling with actually getting what they had to deliver on the promise. So they had all this kit, they have all this data, but actually they don't, as a team, have the ability to use it to its full potential. And so what ends up happening is that teams carry on doing what they're doing, and there's small changes we're seeing, such as agile marketing processes coming in, but actually all that's doing is turning a waterfall bog standard campaign process into an agile bog standard campaign process. Where the benefit of agile is, of course, is when you can start to create scrums of teams. I'll talk about that in a second. And of course, the other layer here is external partners. So where they have expertise, people who can come in and help them. That's great, but that tends also to be very siloed. So you end up with someone who's dealing with the website, someone else who's dealing with email, someone else who's dealing with data analytics. And so you have the same problem with external vendors as you do with your internal teams as well. So the real problem here is that marketers can't pull the levers they already have effectively enough. And if I listened to a podcast the other day, and it was Bo Hartman, who was a key architect in the Goldman Sachs Challenger Bank Marcus. And he said that the biggest challenges are people, product, and platform debt. So people debt being lack of capabilities, so people who've been used to doing marketing a certain way. Product debt being the unwillingness to risk changing something that's already been making a lot of money. It's the old, it works, so why should we change it dilemma. And obviously platform debt being the fast moving nature of technology. So as soon as you bought something, it's obsolete in 2 or 3 years. So how do you keep up with that? And even he admitted that even knowing that from the start, when starting Marcus, he knew that all this debt was being accumulated from the get-go, but it's how you manage that going forward that really makes the difference. And a typical scenario that we walk into when we talk to financial services clients is, there was a great phrase that one of my clients used a few years ago. It was all the gear and no idea. But where they have these huge technology stacks that can do so much and it's cost them millions of pounds. But actually the people who are executing on campaigns day in, day out don't have the skills or knowledge to understand how they use them, even down to the basics of being able to understand user data. So behavioral data through website, through channels such as email or social, understanding different needs of those audiences, how those channels are performing for them, getting that deep data insight, which is the fundamental basis for running a campaign. But on top of that, no marketing team really can understand all of the marketing technology. And this is where we start to see marketing technology specialists come in, external providers such as ourselves putting together, if you like, sort of strike teams that come in with all those capabilities to execute on a campaign or a content performance piece or whatever it might be. So this is the problem that we often come across. I mean, Adobe Experience Manager, other platforms like Sitecore, there's a big dream that's sold, but actually trying to execute on it requires a huge heap of skills that most teams don't have. So there's a big investment needed there, but that is happening. And if we look at some of the highlights in the banking industry, such as DBS, they've successfully managed to transform the culture and organization that surrounds marketing. And they've done that, as Doug was referring to, by looking at shared KPIs, but also by putting in place people who can support marketing teams to deliver on that promise. So we now have business leads who want to launch new products or new services, and they have within their own teams now more analytics, more research, more persona data. They're creating campaign assets. They have a lot of ownership of that side of the piece now. On the other side, we have technology and operations, or marketing technology operations, depending on business. Within that team, you have MarTech leads, so someone who owns an Adobe, someone who owns a Telium or an Eloqua, and those are designed to be product owners and specialists. And then we have data and analytics, and within banks, those are often looking at data lake projects, those huge multi-year transformation type projects. They're also owning core platforms potentially. They're looking at transactional data, but they also have a huge amount of data with customer insights. And where we're seeing the biggest impacts for people like DBS, for example, is where they're able to support that core marketing team. And actually the CMO their team becomes in part almost like a marketing operations or campaign execution team, where they are taking those requirements, they're taking the data that supports it, they're taking the people who can enable the technology, and they're using that to drive and deliver campaigns. And that's how they're seeing value. And if we look at an example outside of financial services, for example, Procter & Gamble, who I think are the biggest advertiser in the world, they have made great strides for digital transformation in terms of data lakes. They have 1 billion plus customer data records, 360 view of the customer, and so on. But they have the ability to service that data to anybody in the business who needs to use it. So if you want to run a campaign, here's your customer set, here's their profile, here's their needs, and off you go. And they also have the shared KPI structure there as well. So people are incentivized along the same lines, which means teams are brought together to deliver on this work. But it also, with Procter & Gamble, starts with the customer. And again, going back to what Doug said earlier, all of this is great, but unless you're trying to solve a particular customer need or a particular customer problem, then it's almost doomed to fail. And so being able to understand that customer problem and work back to how the technology supports it is key to all this as well. And finally, just external partners. I'll stick with the example of Procter & Gamble. That they have brought a lot of that capability in-house now. So when I was talking about the kind of team you need to support this around data, content, messaging, regulation, whatever else it might be, they bring most of that in-house, and they use external agencies to do the cleverer stuff. So there's a role there for both an in-house and an external team to help drive these programs along, where those capabilities are still being built up in-house. And if I just talk very quickly, just to finish off on KPIs, typical KPIs for people that we're talking to at the moment is innovation adoption. So being able to show that you are using a technology that you've spent millions or hundreds of thousands of pounds on, being shown that that's used in the wild, but also more typical objectives such as acquisition, return on investment, on spend, not just on technology, but also on advertising, for example. We're seeing a big push at the moment for optimizing PPC spend, display advertising spend, so on. And that's where platforms like Telium are really, really useful, because they can help you to manage that cross-channel journey and surface the appropriate advert at the right time to the right customer. And also customer satisfaction as well. So after all of this, do we have more satisfied customers? And customer satisfaction to me is a big sort of gap, especially in the social arena for banks and insurance companies, where that is almost treated almost like a side of desk job. And that's something we'll cover in a future webinar. But ultimately, this also has to come down to a purpose as well. So what is it? Not necessarily an existential question of purpose. You know, what are we as a bank or as an insurer? But what is it? What is the purpose of running this campaign, or what is the purpose of our team this year? What is it we're trying to do for customers? In the middle of coronavirus, is our purpose to help people with cash worries or financial worries? Is it to help a small business through their first year of trading? Whatever that purpose is, then helps to define what those KPIs are, and it helps to bring teams along with them. And I'm talking a lot about, I appreciate, about longer term cultural and organizational change within the business. So what I want to do is just take this back down to actually, you know, how this can start making progress now. And there's a quote I love. It's called "Perfection is the enemy of progress" by Winston Churchill. And what he means is that if we're trying to strive to do everything absolutely spot on, nail it from the word go, we'll end up spending most of our year trying to get to that point, rather than actually incrementing and trying to make progress towards that end point. And we did a podcast recently with a good friend of ours, Sol Enemo from Vanquis. He's head of digital transformation there. And there's a phrase, what does good look like? His counter to that is, what does good enough look like? So to keep the cadence of incremental improvements going, he's not looking to nail everything from day one. Clearly, things like the product have to be right, the regulation compliance structure has to be right, but the way in which you service customers or market to them does have a broad spectrum of maturity of capabilities that can be introduced and incremented over time. And what we see quite a bit is that when we talk to financial services businesses and we propose, well, how about, you know, trying to run a personalization campaign with some email thrown in, or whatever it might be, we often get the answer, yeah, but we have all this great new capability coming in a year's time, so there's no point doing this now. And of course, what happens is that in a year's time, the program of work is still dragging along and the team has effectively stood still. So we've got a great focus with our own clients on how we push them forward with what they got, and not to be too caught up in actually what is perfection. It's actually, how do we make small steps to get to perfection, good, better, best, and looking at it from that perspective. And also not taking the eye off where the hockey puck is as well. This is a great analogy you've probably heard before, but going back to my point just now, if you're constantly focused on micro transformation and losing the bigger picture of where the wider transformation of the business, but also your competitors going, that is also a common mistake that we see. You know, we've got this new email automation campaign which has gone live. Well, that's brilliant, but actually, you know, your competitors are now 3 steps on because it's taken you a year to get that far. So it's always important to be aware of that, and also keep an eye on that people and platform debt, and make sure that your teams are constantly upskilled to use what they have. And just to take it to a fintech example, we're talking today about microtransformation, and I actually thought that we made this word up, but it turns out it has been used before by someone called Trisha Price, who's the Chief Product Officer at Encino, who are a cloud banking provider, as you can see. And she's a big advocate of this approach, insofar as she believes that smaller projects should not be viewed as a final destination, but part of an organization's journey towards a larger, fully fledged digital transformation. So she wants to think about microtransformation as analogous to the agile method of software developments. So releasing MVPs, knowing that you can constantly iterate, as Doug was saying, the opportunity to fail fast and then go back to the drawing board and try again. And she looked at it from sort of three perspectives, one of which is obviously the choice of project. So what is a reasonable project to try this with? And like I said earlier, product debt is a massive barrier to transformation within banks, and that's because people don't want to change something that they perceive as already working well. So what is the product that's going to be path of least resistance but still deliver value? The second is keeping the focus on the customer. So she calls a customer your North Star, making sure that the benefits of anything you do are for the benefit of that customer. So solving that customer problem, solving that customer need. And the third is that measurement, learning, and iteration. So as Doug again was saying earlier, being constantly measuring this program of work. So this isn't just a side of desk job, it's something that's core to the team and core to what you're doing. So if we take it back to our example of our marketers sat there with their technology stack and no idea how to use it, where do we start? Well, our first step within an organization such as a bank, this is taken from a project we did not so long ago, is to look at an audit of the technology that's in the stack and what it all does. What are the capabilities? Where's the data? Where does it sit? What can you do with it? Is it integrated? And then also where there's overlapping capability, which product actually does that best? And is it in a position where it's usable? And within this, you may also have some sort of data lake project. Not everyone does, of course, but you may have that. But first of all, it's understanding that. And I sort of say that because it sounds obvious, but it's almost one of the first steps that most of our clients haven't actually been through because of the siloed nature of the organization. So a campaign team working in a UK retail business might not necessarily have any relationship with someone who manages the Eloqua platform, but actually, they're the people they really need to start driving forward utilization and adoption of Eloqua's features, and likewise with Adobe and so on. So this is really important, this audit stage, is to understand what's capable now. And the second is to try and then chunk this down into something that makes more sense. So if we're looking at our technology stack in terms of insights, execution, and measurement, that's a nice, neat way of looking at, okay, what do we need? What do we have available to us from an insights perspective in order to have a data-driven campaign? So we might be looking at Decibel user insights, might be looking at Google Analytics and so on. Our execution platforms are in there. So in this case, Adobe, Eloqua, advertising, ad tech, and social media channels, but also measurement as well. This is something, again, where we see quite still a fairly early maturity level, and that is the ability to properly report on campaign performance or content performance or whatever it might be, and also be able to provide insights off the back of that to start to direct future spend and future campaigns. And I think this is primarily due to a lack of data capabilities within those marketing teams, but what it means is those marketing teams are running campaigns, but they don't really know how they're performing. They obviously have end measurement points, but they don't necessarily know how they can optimize those campaigns even further because they don't have that capability to really drive down into those journeys and find out what's happening. Where are we losing customers? What are our highest performing channels? Why are they high performing? What are customers thinking as they're going through that process? So, for example, we might be looking at chunking this down even further into what is a very simple personalization campaign we can run. So if a client comes to us and says we want to run a campaign, we're not looking at deploying all this stuff from day one because that would be insane. We wouldn't succeed. The data wouldn't be there to support it. I think everyone would be sort of screaming in panic. So we'll be looking to chunk this up. We're looking at a personalization campaign here. Well, okay, well, let's look at what can feed that. Salesforce, too difficult to get information out of at the moment, isn't being used properly. Telium, very complex product. Nobody's really using it properly. Within our clients, how do we, there's no point looking at this stuff. So let's look at Decibel and Google, where we've got nice clean data, we've got really usable data there. And then let's look at Adobe Experience Manager, where we want to personalize on site for that user group, and we want to be able to measure off the back of that our data and campaign results. Likewise, we have done work with Telium in the past. For example, one of the big pushes at the moment is trying to increase efficiency on PPC spend. And so this is where something like Telium comes in, because we can start to track those journeys cross-channel. But again, it's a nice, neat, confined exercise that we can deliver quite quickly, has a demonstrable return on investment because we can show that has increased efficiency of spend by 30-40% by not serving adverts to people who are not within our target audience. So again, it's very easy to do something like that. Again, with Google Analytics, looking at how our social channels are performing, let's get away from posting the same thing out to all our social channels all the time, because that's just not working. How do we make those channels work harder for us? How do we really measure those kind of audiences? How are they interacting with our content through different channels, and how can we optimize that journey back into the website as well? And of course, finally, like I said, is the campaign measurement side of it. So the point I'm making here is it's all about chunking this down as much as possible to make it a manageable piece of work that can be delivered and then either retired or incremented or then scaled across other areas. And that's really the sort of power of microtransformation. It's looking at this not as a 12-month program of work, it's looking at it as a 2-month program of work where there's a clear return on investment at the end of it. So it's a cost neutral, well, rather cost positive exercise. And just finally, how do we actually do that? If anyone on the call is familiar with the optimization process or the agile development process, this really is dealt with in the same way. So when Doug's talking about agile marketing sprints, we're doing exactly the same thing. So we're doing requirements gathering, research, audience personas, data at the very beginning. We're building out a backlog of, for example, personalization tests. We're refining what those are, who's going to be needed to deliver those, and then we go into testing them, deploying them onto production, reviewing them, and then either retiring them or incrementing them or scaling them. And then we've got that reporting process at the back of it, and it all feeds back in a loop. So this is a sort of continuous model of improvement. Where this doesn't work, of course, is where this is just done as a 1 or 2 month project, and then it's just left to rot, and nothing more is done with it. Like optimization, it has to be something that's continually attended to and monitored and optimized. So just to recap, some of the things we talked about today. So microtransformation starts with focusing on the customer need and organizational purpose. It requires, over a longer period, creating collaborative cross-functional Scrum teams with those aligned KPIs, understanding capabilities and data at your disposal. So what can you do now? So not thinking about what we could do in a year's time, but actually what can we do now? And that's often more than you think. Focusing on the now, but also on the competition and the future. So the hockey puck example, let's make sure that we're not just doing well now, but also we've got an eye where we need to be in a year's time. Starting small, so how can you pull the levers you already have? And finally, enabling that cultural microtransformation mindset. And that's really the end point for where we would aim to get clients off the back of this process. So on that note, we've had a couple of questions, I believe. So if I take the first one here, Doug, I think this one was probably best for you. What's the best example you've seen of experimentation culture bringing teams across silos together?
Yes, well, I would have to say the best example is probably not actually in financial services, sadly, where we have digital native businesses like booking.com, for example, who literally work together to test every single change that they make, A/B test the change that is. But there are some really good examples we can see from FS perspective. So I'd encourage everyone to read up on the Superstar DJ program at RBS, at Royal Bank of Scotland, as it is one that they've made some information publicly available about. So what they did in short was that they renamed their journey managers as DJs, so having a bit of fun with it. And they brought in people from other departments like customer service, HR, and legal, and had them contribute to the optimization program as guest DJs and provide their own insights and beliefs, I guess, and worked with the power or wisdom of crowds in that way. They made it fun and engaging. They gave people Beats headphones when they qualified to participate in the program. They adopted a communication platform where everyone involved could see what experience were happening and why. And there was some gamification, I believe, like you could upvote or downvote a proposed idea. And ultimately, they weren't forcing people to adopt data-driven decision-making and these sorts of techniques, but actually enabling them to start to do it in a more fun way. And the outcomes that they saw were pretty incredible. I think they moved from less than 10 tests in their first year that is prior to the introduction of this program, to over 400 in the next year. So from 10 experiments in 1 year to 400 in the next year, by making it fun, by engaging people from other teams and so on. And I think that's a really powerful, publicly accessible example that you can read up about on how to start to build this culture in your own organization.
Great, thank you, Doug. Got one more question here, which is what trends are you seeing in social media with respect to how marketers are doing it successfully? So I think for me, social media is a big untapped resource for financial services firms at the moment, and we don't see many brands doing it very well. There's a lot of what someone said to me the other day, they called it bake sale content, whereby a lot of it is always like look at me type of content rather than actually focused on solving a customer need. There are a couple of brands doing it quite well. I think NatWest is pushing a lot of content, I believe, around financial assistance, that sort of stuff. But actually, you look at a lot of channels, and we had a look at, well, we're working with a client at the moment, and we had a look at their social channels, and they are posting exactly the same post out, on a sort of metronomic fortnightly regularity with the same message to all Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. And actually, those audiences for them are quite different, but they're posting the same message out, but they're not thinking about how that's going to actually drive value for them. And they're not posting content which is useful for customers or is going to in any way engage them. So being able to, I think, explore that journey between social media and getting someone to a product is important. One of the big challenges or big perceived challenges at the moment, I think, is around regulation, around data compliance and so on. There's solutions to that. For example, Hootsuite allows you to store a record of all posts that have been made as a record for compliance purposes, things like that. But to me, that's a big frontier that remains untapped at the moment. It's something we're spending a lot of time now. On that note, we haven't got any more questions. So thank you very much, Doug, and thank you everybody for attending. If you'd like to follow up with us, my email address is on the screen. Otherwise, we hope to see you on the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.